I do know the truth of why they didn't give 20 minutes to Waldo, because he was going to go over time. They gave him an option to split it between 10 minutes, him and me. And if we gave him 20 minutes between both of us, he was not going to let me talk. So let's talk about cows and desert grasslands. So we talked a little enough about wildlife here, right? So, but what are the 5 tools of Aldo Leopold of wildlife habitat management? You got the axe, you got the cow, you got the plow, fire, and the gun, right? So cow is a very important tool for grassland or rangeland management and wildlife habitat management. But let's take it back, zoom out a little bit, and look at the rest of the Trans-Pecos. So most of the Trans-Pecos is in the Chihuahuan Desert. And I did correct here and put it in rangelands, and I had grasslands because not all of the Trans-Pecos are grasslands, right? We have scrublands, we have mixed prairies, we got desert grasslands, and then we go all the way up in elevation, all the way to pinyon forests, right? So compared to the rest of the state, the Trans-Pecos is very, very, very different. You know, I grew up in southern Tamaulipas in Mexico. It's subtropical. Then I went to Kingsville, and it's a semi-arid. So coming back down or over here to the Chihuahuan Desert was very different. I was pretty much a pyromaniac. I like prescribed burning a lot, and I quickly learned that that is not something that we can do most of the time here in the Trans-Pecos. So we already know with all the presentations today that the rainfall is highly variable, spatially and temporally. So we got, you know, flatlands, you got all the way to the Rio Grande, we got less rainfall over there, and then you go to the Sky Islands where you got most of the rainfall, up 26 inches in average. Sometimes you receive less, sometimes you receive more. But what we do know is that drought is always more common than it is not. So you get more years with lower average rainfall than you actually do average or above average rainfall. So specifically for Alpine and not the whole Trans-Pecos, we have had a really, really good year so far. Another thing to really point out before we talk about cows and grazing is that forage productivity is relatively low compared to the rest of the state. And we're in the very, very hot desert and shallow soils, and the soils also vary a lot over here. So sometimes you got deeper soils in your creeks and riparian areas, and then you got shallower soils where you go up to the mountains or other. So, but it's not always dry. I just wanted to put these pictures that I took of ice rangelands and Trans-Pecos, but no. So, when I got here as well, I wanted to point out that I saw a lot of cows in really good condition in areas where there's a lot of creosote. And I was just asking a lot of people, like, how do they, you know, sustain themselves in these lands? Well, because not all of that is creosote. You see some of these lands as well. Some of these pictures are from last year, and some of them are from this year. But so what do we know about grazing in the Chihuahuan Desert? So I'm going to compare a little bit about where areas where you receive a little bit more higher rainfall, kind of like above 25 inches, and compare it to the Chihuahuan Desert, grasslands or rangelands where you receive less than 15 inches on average or less. So for breeds, we have learned that Criollo cattle or Hereford crosses, red baldies, black baldies, do a lot better over here in the drier climates and hotter climates than where we receive a lot more rainfall, right? Conventional breeds like Angus, Brahman, Hereford, and other crosses, and Brangus and all those sorts, they do better where it's a little cooler, more forage, and they have to travel less to, get that forage and meet their requirements, nutrition. So stocking rates, this one's very obvious. Who here, raise your hand, knows about stocking rates? Okay, so that's a good amount of people. So we're talking the same language now. So in eastern central part Texas, you get higher, more predictable forage production. So stocking rates are going to be higher. Over here, well, it's going to be very low, right? You got to be more conservative, and in every operation, you got to be flexible and adaptive. So in some areas, it's stocking rates can be as low as 10 animal units per section. So that is a lot of area per cow. Water spacing, research has shown that 2 miles is enough to, put water between another water. And so cattle will graze within that area. But over here in the desert, in the Chihuahuan Desert, rangeland, Trans-Pecos, what we do not have compared to the central and south Texas or the rest of Texas, we don't have trees. So they like to stay around water a little bit more. So if you put that limit of 2 miles, then you're going to have a lot of undergrazed and overgrazed areas within that pasture, depending on what type of system you have, right? So that's one thing we learned. So fencing, you need a lot of fencing. If you want to do rotational grazing or rotational systems, you're going to need a lot of fencing. So there's ways to get around that. You go and do electric wire fencing, and that's not permanent fencing, so that reduces the costs. And then in larger pastures over there here in the Chihuahuan Desert, it's kind of expensive to put fencing around over here. So virtual fencing is one of the tools that has been emerging. We need to study that a little bit more, and we would like to get into that further on now that the technology is advancing a little bit more. So, and forage seasonality, well, in more higher rainfall areas, we got more reliable growing season. And over here where it's you're limited to pretty much 80 to 100 growing days a year, and then you get to very rank grasses in the winter. You get sparse fine fuel, and fuel fire is really hard to carry. So that's, like I pointed out, one thing that's really hard to do out here. So let's talk a little bit about the research we have done with Dixon Water Foundation at the MIMS in Marfa. They in beginning of they started around 2011 with this grazing system, and we set up to study the two rotational grazing system versus a continuous grazing system, and they set out also exclosures where there was no grazing. So one thing we're going to compare here is the biomass, or how much forage biomass there was between these systems. I want to point out that the rotational is adaptive multi-paddock rotational system. So it's they move cattle between pastures every day or every other day, and between these two systems we have similar stocking rates. The density is going to be different, but the stocking rates are going to be similar, and it was around 100 acres per animal unit. What we did find is that we had no effects, statistical differences between the grazing systems or between soils or the interaction in between. However, we do see some patterns, right? We do see some patterns, but we cannot rely heavily on that there was any differences. We do see that year, as you can see, the graph on the left is net biomass on 2023. We had a higher production, and then 2024 it was a heavy drought year, so it really took a hit on all systems and all soils, and also in the exclosures. And then 2025 was a relatively good rainfall year. And note to 2025, there was no cattle in 2025 because the ranch took the decision to destock because of the drought. So in order to be sustainable and keep those grasslands in pristine condition, destocking was the proper decision to make. So year was the biggest difference here. You can see that year, obviously, it was the rainfall that caused the effect on the pattern here, and also the soils. on the green bars, you see morphosols, and these are deeper soils compared to the musky soils, which are a little bit more shallow soils. So soils took a more different reaction than this grazing system alone. So, and the take-home message on biomass, and I'm just realizing that I'm taking a lot more time than Lalo is, but that for this study in one specific ranch, the grazing system did not matter as much as soils and rainfall for this study. Just like Lalo said, water is very important. So, just to go a little bit quicker, this is raw data on species richness, and as similar to the slide before. On the left, you got 2023. You have a higher count of species richness in both grazing systems. This is raw data. There's no statistical analysis yet, but they had a higher count of species compared to the no grazing or the exclosure. And this happened in all years, in all soils, and doesn't matter what grazing system as well. So, take-home message on this one is that grazing increased the species richness compared to no grazing. So, as a tool for wildlife habitat management, you want a little bit higher diversity for those pronghorn out there in those desert grasslands compared to no grazing at all. And just going to skip through this. I had more, but another take-home message is that the stocking rates, you got to know your supply and demand, and that's the basis of cattle grazing and livestock operations. The rainfall and soil drive a lot of the forage biomass and species richness in these rangelands, and grazing itself matters for wildlife. So grazing is increases the plant diversity compared to no grazing, and it was not a typo. I do want to point out that stocking rates again is one of the last most important things for a cattle operation as well. About that. So yeah, okay. So this was one more site. I didn't mention it before. Is one site, and only for 3 years. But we do need to study more areas, more type of soils with more different type of grazing systems, in between and everything. So we can't really rely on just one crop. Thank you very much.